Welcome to Data Skeptic Machine Intelligence, our podcast series exploring contemporary topics in artificial general intelligence and large language models. In his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Alan Turing raises a list of presumed objections that he wants to address in advance with readers. A few of them seem contemporary, but some are quite quaint and dated. His list includes theological objections, the idea that one might hold that, based on some religious conviction, you would think it is not possible for a machine to possess intelligence. I'm not aware of any religions making that claim, and it seems rather self-defeating in today's day and age. So I went in search of an updated list. What are the reasonable objections about the progress on AI and maybe the possibility of artificial general intelligence? What arguments hold up to contemporary scrutiny? And that's when I came across the book, Why Machines Will Never Rule the World, Artificial Intelligence Without Fear. And today's episode is an interview with the authors of this book. We take a critical analysis of the idea of AGI and explore it from several different angles.
So I'm Barry Smith. I teach at the University at Buffalo. I also have a visiting position in the University of Italian Switzerland, which is where I'm sitting now. So you can see the Italian-shaped cupboard behind me.
I'm Jobst Landgrebe. I am the managing director of Cognotect, which is an AI company based in Germany. I also have a visiting professor position in Lugano at the University of the Italian-speaking Switzerland.
Would you both mind sharing a few details about your academic interests?
So I started life as a philosopher. Actually, I started life in school being very interested in mathematics, and I became interested in the philosophy of mathematics and studied in a joint degree program called Mathematics and Philosophy in Oxford. I gradually became more and more interested in philosophy. I worked for many years in England as a professor of philosophy, but then round about the turn of the millennium, I became involved with people who were applying philosophical ideas in computing, and this took place around the term ontology. And I have become quite a central part of the world ontology community. And the most recent contribution I made is to edit one specific ontology in the form of an ISO standard. And it's been approved in the ISO form. So it is now identifiable as ISO IEC 21838-2, which is the world standard ontology. As a result, it's being used more and more by government agencies and other people because it's a standard and it's being used by lots of people. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy or a virtuous circle ever widening.
I studied medicine biochemistry, where I did an MD PhD in cell biology, and then I also studied mathematics and worked maybe the first 8 years of my professional life as a postdoc and then assistant professor at various academic institutes, Max Planck Institute and DFG Center of Cell Biology in Germany, as a biomathematician mainly, but also cell biologist. And then I left academia, went into business consulting or strategy consulting, and worked there for a bit, but always around AI topics. So early after my PhD, I started working on AI, applying AI to problems in biology and then in the economy. And basically, 2013, I started my own company, Cognotect, which I've been running ever since, which is a AI consulting and software engineering company. But I never lost my theoretical interest in science, so I started to work together with Barry on philosophy of science. That's how we wrote our papers about the limitations of AI, and then our book, Why Machines Can Never Rule the World, which was published by Routledge last year, and which deals with the limitations of AI. And now I've also, based on this, I've also developed, or Barry and I have developed also an interest at doing similar things for physics. So now we also do philosophy of science for physics, quantum science, and so on, and mathematics.
Well, the book will have a link in the show notes, Why Machines Will Never Rule the World. Can you tell us a little bit about the audience? Who should pick this up?
So the original motive for the book, I guess, were certain problems which Jobst was facing in his company and which he will talk about. But the background was an increasing tendency of certain groups of people to be afraid of AI. And the main thesis of the book is that the long-term fear that people have now with ChatGPT and so forth is that AI is getting more and more clever, more and more general, and eventually it's going to be cleverer than human beings. And then there will come a point where it starts to create even more clever AI systems to an extent that there will be a hyperbolic explosion of AI and it will take over the galaxy. And then there will be no room left for poor human being idiots. And the book basically defends the thesis that all of this is impossible, that AI will never be very clever. It will certainly never even approximate to the intelligence of a human being or even of a rabbit. It can do fantastic things. So we're not AI skeptics. We are skeptics about the possibility of an ever-expanding power of AI along the intelligence spectrum.
So is it the notion of artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence or both that you object to?
So I also object against the notion of artificial intelligence. I think it's a silly marketing name that was invented in the 1950s to get a lot of funding for this type of research. In my view, what it is just applied mathematics that's based on the principles invented at the end of the 18th century by Legendre, Gauss, and others, where they invented regression. Now, of course, it has taken massively off due to computing power and great mathematical insights into how to make this in a much better way. But in the end, it's just applied mathematics. And we call what is the result of this, we call implicit mathematical equations, as opposed to explicit ones that you design with your hand, like in physics, classical physics and modern physics, where you design, quantum field theory was, of course, designed by hand. And this, now you can basically take data and get the equations automatically. But they are still what we call extended Newtonian mathematics, so continuous differentiable functions that are generated by these models. And we also know quite well what we have to change to generate the models in a different way, about which I can talk later. But certainly this has nothing to do with natural intelligence and also nothing to do with imitating natural intelligence, but it's just a way to find regularities in data. And for this, it's super efficient. It can, when there are regularities in data, it can find them better than humans can, and then become better at humans, like, playing the game of Go or the game of chess, or many, many other examples. So it is very useful, but it has nothing to do at all with intelligence. It's just computation. And so I reject all three notions: artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and superintelligence. All of this is just nonsense. But on the other hand, this is a super attractive way of applying mathematics. And you just have to understand what it is, and then you can use it very efficiently.
Yeah, it would be hard to argue that modern approaches to AI are anything different from applied mathematics, as you say. Yet, I guess someone who's very optimistic would say somewhere in there could be an emergent phenomenon. I like the comparison to like an economy. You bring enough people together and somehow they'll invent taxes and they'll loan money to each other, and maybe there'll even be a black market. It's not from first principles. Those things emerged because people wanted to trade. Could it be that the scale of applied mathematics has these emergent properties, and one of them is intelligence?
There is, of course, emergence in nature. Emergence is the principle of evolution, right? I mean, there is, in evolution, you have certain conditions which you don't understand very well, but which lead to what Darwin calls mutation and selection. Then there's much more to say about this, but basically it's this, yeah. And these factors lead in a very complicated system to the emergence of new properties, which are also encoded genetically. And so why shouldn't this work with computers? Well, the reason is basically that what we have in nature at the element of single-celled organisms, but even more as more complex organisms, and when organisms interact, then we have systems of complex systems. And complex systems have properties which make it impossible for us to create mathematical models for them. So essentially, Newtonian mathematics or expanded Newtonian mathematics are incompatible with complex systems. Complex systems have properties that prevent such models to emulate them properly or simulate them properly. And so what we can do with mathematics is always only simulate or emulate parts of what these systems do. And there we can even beat them. But we cannot get a holistic emulation of a complex system using these types of mathematics. And that has many reasons that we give in the book. But just to give you a very simple one, complex systems have the ability to develop not only new elements. Yeah, for example, if you think of yeast cell, when it's budding and dividing, then you have two yeast cells, so you have created a new element, but it's the same type because both are genetically identical. But living cells or living organisms can also create new element types. For example, bacteria can acquire resistance against an antibiotic, though all their ancestors didn't have this resistance. And so this is really a new element type. This ability to create new element types is mathematically corresponds to the ability to create in a phase space a new dimension. So a phase space is a complicated coordinate system with many coordinates to express this for non-mathematicians. And so now you have, let's say, a 10-dimensional coordinate system. Suddenly you're adding new dimensions. But a mathematical model is always rooted in a predefined coordinate system. So if you take quantum mechanics and now let's take quantum computers, you have basically defining quantum bit, in a predefined Hilbert space, which is nothing but a phase space, and then you model what's happening in your quantum computer mathematically based on this phase space. But you of course not assume that the phase space suddenly changes and gets a new coordinate. So the mathematical model always requires you to put this into neural networks. So let's say you have a neural network which can process 10 to 12 bits or 10 to 10 bits, then basically you have a predefined input space and also predefined output. And the model can adapt within this predefined space, but you can't add new dimensions so easily. And so this is the point that mathematical systems are limited, and that's just one of 7 major points, are limited to a certain designed modeling space. But natural systems evolve completely orthogonal to this, and they can create new spaces that are completely unexpected.
I would add the next biological layer. You introduced us to bacteria, but gradually we have humans, and then humans join together to create families and tribes, and gradually they join together to create cities and nation states and so forth, and armies and police forces and all of these other things. They are all emerging from the biological processes and the biological entities at lower levels. Now, how does this happen? This happens because human beings want things. They want food. They want progeny. They want to succeed. They want to protect themselves against predators. And this constellation of will, of human beings wanting certain things, wanting to live in a city with a nice concert hall and so on, that's where emergence comes in. You can only have emergence. It takes you from the simpler to the more complicated. You can only reach the more complicated if someone or something wants the more complicated, maybe not even recognizing the nature of their want. Now, for that, you need a will. Humans have a will. They can want things. They can desire things. Machines, like all mathematical entities, cannot have a will. And if you look at the literature of Bostrom, for instance, or Yudkowsky, on the goal systems of AI, they talk nonsense. They don't have any coherent account of how a computer system could want something, and so there can be no emergence.
Thank you to today's sponsor, EOS Data Analytics, which is all about using satellite analytics solutions to drive sustainability. They're helping professionals across different industries make data-driven decisions and adopt sustainable practices. Now here's the captivating part about EOSDA, is their agriculture-focused satellite constellation EOSsat. The best part? They're integrating EOSsat's data into all their platforms to meet their customers' exact needs based on years of hands-on experience. Their team unites 60 in-house data scientists, including 25 PhD professors, who develop their own machine learning models and neural networks to provide high-quality, data-driven products to over 950,000 people across every continent. An EOSDA LandViewer platform can become the right hand for data scientists, with dozens of on-the-fly satellite data processing and visualization tools from 20 different satellite providers. And if you want to use your academic research, EOSDA offers a discount to access the platform under its Academic Outreach Program. EOS Data Analytics is all about turning geospatial insights into tools that solve real-world business tasks while keeping sustainability at the forefront. For all the remote sensing enthusiasts, EOSDA gives a 10% discount for the Data Skeptic listeners with promo code EOSDA10. Use the promo code EOSDA10 and start leveraging the power of advanced remote sensing data. If you're curious about EOS data analytics and how they can help your business, academic, or personal purpose, you should check out their website at eos.com. Are you a software engineer looking to make an impact with one of the world's premier data and technology companies? Well, you should look into Bloomberg. Bloomberg is building the world's most trusted information network for financial professionals. And right now, they're looking for engineers to join them. You know, for me, there's two critical features when I would consider a new role. Impact first, job security second. Well, in terms of job security, you can look up Bloomberg and see how long they've been around. But more importantly, in terms of impact, you'll be part of a team that builds and delivers tools to help the world's leading business and financial decision makers surface relevant information in an ever-changing ocean of data so that they can act quickly on it. Their software engineers build solutions that are relied on by more than 350,000 financial professionals all around the world, using them to make critical business decisions. The company is committed to building a diverse workforce full of fresh perspectives. So if you're in the market or just thinking about what your next move might be, learn more about this opportunity by visiting bloomberg.com/careers. That's bloomberg.com/careers. I think if I were to steelman the other side, I would say that the want is the objective function, this, mathematical goodness thing that we're going to optimize for, and maybe the will is the power of the GPU and the energy we put into it to optimizing the function. Would that be a fair response?
If you create, for example, using reinforcement learning, you have a reward function. And the AGI proponents say this corresponds to our intentions, to human intentions. But the problem is that the reward function has only very simple mathematical metric that it can optimize. And even primitive animals have much, much more complicated reward systems. And these reward systems, if you look at the rewards that Caenorhabditis elegans or another primitive organism, that's a worm, that they have, and if you kind of try to behavioristically, by how they behave, to model the rewards that they are getting inside their own neuronal system, you find that you cannot even write down a trace of the reward steps that they have. So if you have a regular process, you know this from Markov models that you worked on, you have it, and you look at how they behave, then you get a regular trace, right? And that's why you can then do hidden Markov modeling or other Markov modeling. But here with the rewards that biological organisms obtain from their own central nervous system to guide their behavior, certainly they have this, So if you have a positive experience, a human being also feels happy, which is a type of reward. And that's how drug abuse works, that people get artificial happiness of using drugs and become drug addicted, which is a very interesting model of a reward-induced behavior. Not model, but actually disease based on reward inducement. But basically still, it is super complicated, the whole reward pattern. And even, heavily drug addicted people have very different lifestyles. They have something in common, but that they focus on the drug, but they have different ways of acquiring the money to buy the drugs. Some become criminals, some don't, and so on. And so it's still the whole reward system is so complex. That's because the intentions are based on a complex reward system that we don't understand. If we could model that reward system, then we could also model the will, but we don't understand it at all. And so the reward functions we have today, they are super primitive, and therefore they don't have the flexibility to create a trace of behavior as the natural reward systems can.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The reward systems we use today seem rather primitive. I had to hand construct some of them for projects in grad school, and even just getting an agent to move through a maze and avoid the monster in the pits can be very tricky, as simple as that sounds.
The Wampus world.
Exactly, yes. The good old Wumpus. But, I also remember the techniques that were being applied 20 years ago to translation, and they were laughable. Yet today we have more complicated approaches that seem to work very well for natural language translation. Could it be that we'll just have some clever humans come up with better approaches to reward systems in the future?
Oh, certainly. I'm not saying that we can't have better reward systems. And I mean, if you look, for example, at ChatGPT, it has a very elegant reward system that's much better than all reward systems we've seen before. So in chess and Go, which have been the prime AI examples before ChatGPT, the most popular ones, especially in Go, you had a reward is based on the points of the game of Go. And so that's a very arithmetic and simple reward system. And if you train billions of games, then you can, by using this reward system, obtain strategically acting AI, which is impressive. What's not happening in ChatGPT? On ChatGPT, the problem is that how do you create a reward from an utterance of a system, right? And so what they did is that they trained using a technique called PPO. They trained a metric with 6 levels of reward obtained for certain utterances. So in a certain phase of the training, the model is creating output, and users rate the output in 6 categories. And from this, you derive then a mathematical model that is more differentiated as a reward system than the model for Go. And so now you can suddenly create utterances that are relatively convincing from a certain perspective, like give me a cooking recipe for tomato soup. Right now, you get a really good result out of ChatGPT. Now, it might be more difficult to say, I'd like a recipe for tomato soup from northern Italy, 18th century style, because the training basis so a human can find such a training recipe quite easily, in the worst case, by going to a library, a specialized library in northern Italy. But for ChatGPT, it would be hard because it lacks training data. But if you get to more difficult tasks that are very hard to train at training time, ChatGPT becomes useless. And that's because it totally lacks a differentiation of the reward system that humans have. And so there will be more progress in creating better reward systems, but they will always only approximate parts of the human cognitive system. So what is intelligence? We haven't discussed this yet. So intelligence is 2 things. In the book, we argue it's mainly the ability to find a solution for a problem that you have never encountered before, which you have no training, but that still satisfies your needs and intentions. Or to put it another way, which you don't do in the book, but there's another way of saying it, to find a new solution for an existing problem that nobody has been coming up with. And these abilities are not trainable because they require the full complexity of the complex system, which we don't understand and can't model. But certainly, we can always get better. By making a big effort, we can achieve something. But that always means that we have to exploit regularities. And as soon as we come in the area where we have what we call non-ergodicity, right, which means that basically you have at each point in time a system evolves a new distribution. Then by looking at past states and training on past states of the system, you will never be able to achieve a good result, because the system will at the next point in time create a distribution that has never occurred in the training data, or that is only to some extent similar to something that has occurred in training, but not occurred often enough. And so therefore the system will not react adequately, because the sample is, so to speak, drawn from another distribution than the training distribution. And that's a core characteristic of complex systems, to create such non-ergodic processes, to run as non-ergodic processes. And so that's what you also know from your work in AI, that you always need either a Markov-like process or another form of regularity to train successfully. If you look at applications like, traffic prediction in LA is now perfect with AI, because the LA traffic is so regular, because it's a partial system, and because when you aggregate individual behavior, you get a great regularity, that there's almost never traffic at 3 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday or on a Sunday night. On a Saturday night, there is some, but because on Monday people have to work, at 3 a.m. in the morning, the highway is almost empty. That's a regularity, and these you can train for. The same is for electricity consumption, many other, but these are all partial systems. But if you look at this ability to find new solutions to unseen problems, that won't work.
Well, I like that definition and that standard of intelligence. As people have put forward previous tests, can it beat humans at chess, at Go, at these sorts of things? AI has so far knocked down a lot of the challenges. But as you point out in the book, one of the great challenges is to engage in dialogue. Why is that the key one that machines seem to be struggling with?
So I think there are 2 reasons. Basically, if we take the realm of dialogue, and remember, even talking about dialogue, we're taking the simplest case, because many conversations, as here, involve 3 people or more than 3 people. But let's stick with dialogue. So first of all, every dialogue is different. And so there is no data which is regular in such a way that we can use it to train a machine learning system. That's the first problem. And the second problem is that humans are able to engage in dialogue, sometimes in very complicated dialogue, Again, for the reason that we already mentioned, because when humans engage in any kind of activity, they do so because they want to exercise their will. So we all, the three of us, we have certain goals which we want to realize through this dialogue. It's the same with any kind of dialogue. Even if the goal is only to pass the time or to be friendly, we still have a goal. And that's what keeps the thread of the dialogue alive. That's what makes it a friendly dialogue, for instance. And now, if you can't train a system to engage in an appropriate kind of dialogue, what do you end up with? You end up with the annoying pseudo chatbots that we are greeted with when we call our bank. They don't know how to speak with a human being because they don't know how to engage in conversation.
But to play the devil's advocate, ChatGPT is pretty good in a certain way at giving an answer to one question or to reacting to one task. But it breaks down when you try to conduct dialogue. Why is that the case? Well, it's like this. ChatGPT was trained for certain tasks that occur frequently in the internet, that are frequently observable, like find me this, give me a recipe for this, write this type of text. There are still infinitely many possibilities of formulating such tasks and of fulfilling them, but you can train this kind of behavior because it is like one layer of a phase space. And if you provide enough examples of this, you get some effect. And that's what makes ChatGPT so relatively satisfying. Well, it has weaknesses, but which gives it some effect that has created this hype around it. The problem is if you engage in a dialogue, there are now infinitely many possibilities already after 3 or 4 steps of the dialogue. Yeah, if you have 3 tuples of question answer or utterance response, then you get more combinations than there are particles in the observable universe. Right? You get something like 2 to the 1,000 or 2 to the 2,000. So many more particles than there can be observable in the universe. And so then this, of course, can't be trained because there are too many combinations. It's a combinatorial explosion. And so because of that, when you do such a dialogue, you are exploring part of this phase space of the model that can't be prepared by training. And that's why it starts to misbehave. So then it starts to praise Hitler or ask somebody to commit suicide. Why can't we prevent this? Because we can't prepare the model for this. It's the same for the same reason. We can't ensure that the model will always say the truth. Actually, in certain domains, it will almost always say wrong things. Barry can now give us some examples, but the reason for this is the combinatorial explosion and the inability to prepare the model for this combinatorial explosion. If you would now say, okay, we want to optimize it to say always the truth is what Elon Musk is trying to do, then you have to change the reward style, and that will lead to the system almost always saying, I don't know.
Yes, I've become obsessed with ChatGPT in recent weeks. So I originally thought that it would be a useful device for creating a consistent set of summaries of the views of philosophers that I use in some of my work. The first problem that I saw with that was that it always gives a different answer. And if you want a consistent set which other people can use, they all need to be able to get the same answer. And that is just not the way ChatGPT is built. And so not only did I get different answers, I rapidly noticed that I would get answers which were full of falsehoods. So in my own case, for instance, I asked it to list some of the major publications of Barry Smith. And it created then a list, but none of them were publications that I'd written. All of them had my name. And some of them were published in a journal which doesn't exist. So I asked them, who was the editor of this journal? And they said it was me. So they invent a whole journal. And then I ask it to produce a list of the most important papers in a given area which is single authored. And they gave 5 papers, 2 of which had et al. In the author's name. Now, even a not very experienced human being knows that et al. Means no more than one author. Now, I could talk for hours about the peculiar problems that ChatGPT has. Again, when we're talking about people who are not Michael Jackson, but people who are represented in the web, they have biographies, but the biographies are invented. And one example which came up just recently. So I have a friend who likes writing papers about continental philosophy. And he had a paper in which he mentioned a dozen names of continental philosophers in separate sentences on the same page. And I asked ChatGPT to give me a list of the people who were influenced by one of the philosophers on that page. And it listed them all. All of the authors who were listed on that page were listed as having influenced this philosopher X. Now, that means that one of the syntactic rules which ChatGPT uses when it sees the word influence is appears on the same page as, because that was all they had in common. Some of them were enemies of X. Some of them knew nothing about X. Some of them would never, ever mention if they did know about X. Just one or two of them influenced X, but this long list was created just because they were all on the same page. Now, that means that while ChatGPT is very good at certain things, it's also very bad, embarrassingly bad at certain other things. And basically, it's bad at getting things right. It's bad at truth. And truth is important. It may not be important if you're summarizing weather data, where you could make small mistakes. It wouldn't matter because the weather, on the whole, goes bravely marching on. But if you're summarizing data from a nuclear power station or something, or a hospital, then ChatGPT may be a really dangerous kind of instrument.
Truth requires natural intelligence, right? So animals can basically have an elementary sense of truth. So, for example, if foraging birds find a new tree where they think that this is new food, they can have shouts or sounds, make sounds that attract the other animals of their group to come to this tree. Now, one of the animals may have a misperception, and then it may attract other animals, and they then realize that they will have been caught there for nothing. So then they will fly away or maybe even attack the animal that did this, so punish it. So what I'm trying to say is that there's an elementary notion of truth. And for them, truth is the sensory signal I'm receiving able to fulfill my needs. And then in human beings, it becomes more complicated, but it's basically the same. Does what the other person tells me correspond with reality as I see reality? And it is, of course, of central importance for survival, reproduction, and everything and also all the higher cultural overhead that humans develop on top of these basic goals, biological goals. And that the machines can't do this is because we cannot model the understanding of anything in a machine. Because although we can say what it means for us to understand something or to check its truth, we cannot describe how this is biologically happening. We have no idea. Not even how this happens in animals, but also not, of course, even less in humans. And so because of this, because we can't create a model of this, we can't make the machine understand what is truth unless we do deterministic models. So if we have symbolic AI, like the Wampus World AI, it can then, but that's because you have programmed logical rules into it. And in the end, that's also only a syntactic, as we both know, that's only a syntactic algorithm. But basically, the machine doesn't understand what it's doing, neither in symbolic AI nor in the modern type of stochastic AI. And therefore, it can't do it. And it's illusion to believe that you can, as Elon Musk claims, teach a machine to tell always the truth. You could try it. You could actually skew an AI using the proper training strategy to have a very high likelihood of producing a true result, but then it would in most cases say, I don't know.
Would it be fair to say that understanding might be sort of a double standard, though? If you asked, let's say there was a student we had and we're trying to determine, do they really understand some theorem? We can't put them in an MRI machine and double check.
That's a good question. So how would we check if a child or a student or anyone really understands something? We tell him to find, for example, either an explanation of this. So in mathematics, that would mean, please develop the theorem from the following axioms, and you now choose different axioms. Then there's an alternative proof path, and you ask the student to produce it. Or the alternative is, of course, to say, please apply this to the following situation, which is different. And then you check if for transfer. Transfer is a very strong indicator of the ability to understand. Also, a very, very classical form of checking for transfer is, can you describe what this means for me? And not for you, but for me. And then you ask for intersubjectivity of understanding and so on. And transfer and the ability to put yourself into the shoes of your conversation partner and so on. And all of this is done routinely every day. Even in very short sequences is done, yeah. And for example, if a pilot and the tower talk about the landing, and the tower operator has the impression that the pilot doesn't understand, he will ask a question where he can really, without considering what he's doing, automatically be able to ask such a question. All of this is human intelligence. We don't know how this works, and we can't emulate it in machines at all.
Well, I'm not necessarily fond of thinking of myself as just a machine, but I also struggle disproving that idea. When I, go talk to biologists or kind of inspect something about my construction, it is very mechanical at the sort of cellular level.
But I think we also should note that we are all fully aware of what understanding is, and we all experience in our own minds what it is to understand and not to understand a thing, just as we all experience consciousness. So we know that we have consciousness, each of us. We don't know with absolute certainty that the person we're talking to has consciousness, but we know that it's very, very highly likely. And now, again, there's no way in which we can reproduce understanding and consciousness in a machine, because it's a piece of mathematics which has been made mechanically effective. And there's no place there for consciousness or understanding or inner awareness. And we talk quite a lot in the book about the nature of inner awareness and how it is consistent with the laws of physics and so forth. So many devotees of AI start out from the idea that the human brain is a computer in any case. And so we only need to find the trick of copying the pattern which humans use, and that the neural networks is supposed to be this beautiful copy of the pattern of the brain. And once we found that trick, then we will be able to reproduce human intelligence inside the machine. But human brains are not machines, and human consciousness is not a matter of computation. It's something very different from computation. And that in this respect, we are, of course, not part of the majority amongst intellectuals. Mm-hmm. It seems that most intellectuals are quite happy with the idea that their brain is a computer.
Yes, this is a very important point. You are now coming to one of my favorite topics, Kyle, and that's the view of biological entities as machines. It was invented by René Descartes. So I give you an example. Descartes believed that when he wrote about death, what is death? He said death is a breakdown of the mechanics of the human body. When he talks about disease, he says the mechanics of the cells of the human body doesn't work anymore. And this view of the human body, or anyhow organisms as machines, became more and more popular. La Mettrie, whom we also cite in the book, wrote a book called L'Homme Machine, Man as a Machine. This has dominated many French and English or British philosophers and physicists until the later part of the 19th century. Though some philosophers and physicists have doubted this mechanical view of man, it was clear when Boltzmann invented thermodynamics and the theory of micro and macro states that this view of how organisms work is inadequate. So even before general theory of relativity, before quantum mechanics, it became very clear that what we are facing here is a very complicated phase space, and that the regularities that we can see are only possible in a very, very tiny amount of systems, and that in nature, the regularities we are talking about when we have a Newtonian or Cartesian view of the world are the exception. What we know since Boltzmann, that in real nature, most of the phenomena we can't understand. They are not, though of course, at the ultimate level, there must be causalities in those systems. They are too complex for us to describe them. And that's why already Ernst Mach in the 19th century said physics now will move away from causalities and will start to only talk about functions. So that physics now is only, because he was so desperate about what was going on there in statistical mechanics, that's what Boltzmann developed, that he started to say, let's just not talk about causalities anymore, like Laplace and his demon tried to do, and where they believed we can model everything with differential equations, but let's now move on and say we have only functions. And this already showed you that already in the 19th century, physicists capitulated in face of the complexity of nature. And all the clever physicists of the 20th century and who then basically made discovery that were exploitable in engineering. And then we can build machines based on these laws, and they make us very successful, but that's all we can do. But we can't even explain what's going on in the thunderstorm. We can't explain the causalities. We have certain very simplistic models that are like analogies. But if you look at how physicists usually describe what they do, they make so many assumptions about a situation until they have simplified the situation so much that they can now apply the mathematical models. That's what Nancy Cartwright calls physics as a theater. and I think that teaches one that it's just when biologists talk mechanically about the human body or cells or whatever, they always talk about the small part where the mechanic, which they have simplified down so much that now they can apply their model. But if you look at the whole thing again, then you realize that's wrong. And if you want, I could give an example, but I've talked enough.
No, an example might be great because I'm starting to wonder about where the limit lies. What's the ceiling we're going to hit?
Yes. So let's look at, I think a great example is cancer.
Yeah.
So if you look at cancer, you have cells which divide in an uncontrolled fashion and thereby destroy an organ and ultimately kill you. So we have now at least 50 years of molecular cancer research. So we have tools to start to understand which molecules are involved in cancer since 60 or 70 years, and now since 50 years, we have really good molecular tools that get better and better every year. And so what have they done? They've analyzed various what they call cancer pathways. Yeah. And so every 10 years, famous cancer researchers published in Cell a series that's called The Hallmarks of Cancer, where they describe which pathways they've discovered. But basically, it's still that even if we then say we have now a partial understanding of cancer, and now we develop a drug that is inhibiting the mechanistical pathway that we have found, the cancer cell just rebounds. Yeah, so we now pharmacologically inhibit a certain cancer mechanism that we think is a hallmark of cancer. Well, okay, 90% of the cancer cells die, 10% don't die, they regrow, they become resistant, and they grow again. And so then you say, okay, now we inhibit a second pathway at the same time, or third pathway. Well, then we are basically back to poisoning the body like with platinum therapy, with classical cytotoxins, because now we are inhibiting so many pathways that it's like just poisoning. So we make no progress in solid cancer treatment. And that's because we don't understand what's going on. All the partial mechanical models don't give us a full picture. And so the ceiling is whenever we try to model complex systems fully, we fail. But where we have a very big success story ahead of us still, we are still only beginning and have a lot of progress to expect, is when we make systems ourselves. Because then we have simple systems that we have figured out, where we have applied laws, built parts, make the parts interact as we expected, tested them. Then we could build airplanes, and I'm certain that we will build, for example, nuclear fusion power plants. Yeah, because there we know all the principles. It's very hard to make them for technical reasons, but we will have nuclear fusion as an energy source. This is wonderful. Then we will solve all our energy problems, And so I'm an optimist for the application of laws of physics to building machines, but I'm a pessimist with regard to complex systems, because basically the mathematics we have are very, schematic. They're highly aesthetic, but they're very schematic, and nature's not schematic. So there's a big discrepancy between the incredible complexity of natural beings, even bacteria, but let alone humans and mice or birds, but also inanimate nature, like the whole water cycle of the earth, the whole weather cycle, the climate. I think these phenomena we will not be able to ever model holistically. So there's a ceiling are the complex systems. And if you read Feynman's textbook on physics, or even more modern physics on textbook, the good physicists, they all know this. They all know that their models are highly partial, and that the greatest benefit of physics is technology. So systems we build ourselves.
Well, could it be that we end up developing such a complex system, and for whatever reason, maybe due to some impossibility theorem, our theory can't describe that system, yet the system has these behaviors that we would consider AGI? Why couldn't that be?
So let's first look at such a system. It was called Chernobyl. That was a simple system where we had nuclear fission under control to create energy. And because the system was misused by complex systems, humans, it got out of control and became a complex system. It acquired it had new element type, which was that it didn't have a roof anymore. It had an uncontrolled nuclear reaction, so it became a complex system. It had then suddenly its energy flow, which got out of control. So we are able to turn simple systems into complex systems. The same happens with drivers. So the car is a simple system, but the driver is a complex system. If you combine the two, you get car accidents, you get even people who use the car as a weapon to crash into people and all of this. So we are very good at turning simple systems into complex systems. However, will we get AGI by doing this? No, I don't think so. That would mean that the system would have to behave in the way we described at the beginning. It should be able to solve problems that it hasn't seen before. Why is this so unlikely to happen by chance, as you say? Because this is the highest form of creating order in nature that we know. And nature is in nature, the most fundamental law of nature is entropy. So everything that happens in nature is actually creating less order from order. And now you say, oh, by chance we'll create the highest form of making order out of non-order. I think it's just so unlikely that it's impossible.
But it seems that evolution did it at least once. Why
Yes.
couldn't we simulate it at least once?
So evolution worked on the basis of the will to survive and the will to reproduce, or the drivenness of lower organisms to find energy. And those things are factors that in the accidental development of some sort of emergent complex system of the sort that you described would be absent. What is going to be the will, or the massively complex combination of wills of hundreds of generations, thousands of different kinds of organisms, all of them subject to the striving to survive and reproduce, and also the needs to survive and reproduce in alien environments with predators and so on. The idea that we have survived at all is a miracle. That miracle has an explanation, namely the drivenness of the organisms involved. Without the drivenness and without the will, you won't have even survival after the first step.
If you look at theory of evolution, we have no and theory of how the molecules of life came about, like amino acids and nucleic acids. We have no explanation. The whole theory doesn't work. There is no way to, we don't have any theory where we can use the laws of physics or chemistry to understand how out of inanimate matter we got these molecules of life, which are the foundation of this strange drivenness, which is the ability of living, which is a unique ability of living systems to turn anorganic matter using an energy source into highly organized organic molecules that can reproduce. To create basically ATP or GTP, so these are the molecules that the universal energy molecules out of inanimate matter. That's what plants can do. And then, the whole food chain allows this also to other non-plants to do this. But this is incredible that you have just minerals and nitrogen. And out of this, using sunlight, you can create molecules of life. And we don't understand how these molecules evolve. We have no idea at all. Our explanations are rather silly for this. And so I think that even if the scientists who do this, they wouldn't say so, but I think they are rather silly. Because we don't know anything about this, we can't emulate it. Because it's so hard. I mean, even if you look at one cell, how one cell is permanently extracting negative entropy from its surrounding by creating order in itself. And also, by the way, of course, leaving behind entropy. Yeah. So because if you use wood to heat your milk pot, then of course you create entropy. You have made order for yourself in your organism by drinking the hot milk, but you have created more entropy outside. And all of this is not understood. So we can't set up a system to emulate evolution as it occurred in reality, because evolution, I think, is even more complex than the human brain. Obviously, because it's the interaction of millions of species in a biosphere, and we have no clue how this works. And I think it doesn't matter, because there's so much good stuff we can do with mathematics. Nevertheless, I'm not sad that we can't create intelligence. We just have to accept it. So what? We are not God. That we have known that we are not God for a long time.
So there are some people who think that we can emulate human intelligence by emulating the processes of evolution which led to human intelligence. But those people do not realize that evolution is massively more complicated than intelligence. So if we understood intelligence, then we wouldn't need to go around this incredibly difficult circle.
So David Chalmers argues that we can emulate evolution and thereby create intelligence, but he fails to see that it's even harder to emulate evolution than intelligence.
Well, if it's going to be impossible for us to create a machine that has an artificial general intelligence to it, then there must be some test that machines will fail and humans will pass. Is that still Alan Turing's imitation game, or is there a better measure of AGI?
So in the book, we rather dismiss the original form of the Turing test because it's too simplistic. And in principle, you could pass the test if you can just get 3 out of 5 people to say that for 3 minutes the machine was not distinguishable from a computer. So what we promote in the book is what we call the Stasi Turing test. And the Stasi Turing test would be from 3 to 5 hours, which is the rough length of a Stasi interrogation. And the interrogator would be a trained officer of the Stasi who is trained to detect lies. He's trained to test cover stories. And people, they have this rather simplistic view of the Turing test. They don't realize that to convince a strong-minded interrogator that you're a human being, you're going to have a life history which will include memories of how your mother treated you when you were young and how you felt when you had your first kiss. And the Stasi interrogator can see through your cover story unless you are a human being with all the emotions and all the kinds of experiences that humans have. You might be able to dumb up a little bit of that for the interrogator, but I'm sure you wouldn't be able to convince the interrogator that you are a human being.
Yeah, the problem is that you can see that today's chatbots, they are so stereotypical. And it's, if you are trained in this, you can easily debunk any chatbot. And this claim that, today's chatbots have already passed the Turing test is just... Alan Turing would, if he would still live and be here, he would say, no, that's not what I meant, And if you basically think of right now, we only test this with chat that is entered as text, but that's of course not intelligence yet. I mean, basically, intelligence means that you take into account everything, not only text, but the body language, the facial expression, the tone of the voice. None of this a machine can do. And it already fails with a few steps of a dialogue. It already fails, even if it's only typed. But it would never. So I give you a good example. So there is now a certain type of poker. I'm not a poker specialist, I forgot, which we mentioned in our paper where the machine beats a human being. Yes, Texas Hold'em, thank you, Barry. But it only does so if if all opponents don't see each other and are not allowed to speak to each other, but can only do the bits, As soon as you add a camera and humans can see each other and speak, the machine will always lose, because then the humans can exploit their intuitive interpretation of the opponent's goals. And the machine can't do this. It can only calculate what is the most likely bit I have to do to win given this path of the game. And if humans can't use their human skills, then the machine will beat them. But if you allow the humans to use their human skills, they will always beat the machine if they're good poker players. So this shows you again, as soon as intersubjectivity comes in, which is a highly complicated, complex system ability, you have total failure of the machine.
Even if we give the machine access to the video and audio stream of the cameras?
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, this is so fascinating. I mean, machines can't interpret text. Yeah, you can easily show this on ChatGPT. If you give it a text and say, ask it to extract something that you can only extract if you understand the text, it will never extract the right data, right? So information extraction seems to be a rather simple task, but it fails totally with generic AI systems. It's very, very hard to build systems that can do a bit of information extraction, right? Unless it's in syntactic parsing, like find the dates or something like these, or street names. But otherwise, it's very, very hard. And all these classical tasks of NLP, like entity recognition and all the text interpretation tasks, they can't do it properly. And that has to do because they don't understand text semantics and text pragmatics, which is even harder, which is something like, please extract the entity that comes before the entity that is about that entity, and so on. And then you have, when you have pragmatics, it will fail totally. And this is even worse with movie interpretation. Yeah. So if you have your movie, because then you have images that contain sense and text that contain sense. And that's why also this whole idea that we have to be afraid of AI surveillance is rather naive. We have to be, yes, AI face recognition works, but AI interpretation of something that somebody does or says fails completely. Right. And that's why if you want to do mass surveillance, you still need a proper Stasi made of humans.
Can you remind listeners the name of the book and maybe a note on where to find it?
It's called Why Machines Will Never Rule the World, Artificial Intelligence Without Fear. It was published by Routledge. And if you type in the title into Amazon, you will immediately get a hit and be able to purchase this. And I think this edition here, the softcover edition, is also really cheap. I mean, I've heard now, by the way, Barry, that many universities in Switzerland all use it now as a standard textbook for teaching AI limits.
Ah, I see.
Very cool.
Oh, well.
Thank you.
We'll have a link in the show notes for listeners who want to pick up a copy.
Thanks, was great.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you, Kyle.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Well, that concludes this installment of Data Skeptic Machine Intelligence. Join me next time when we're going to explore the degree to which large language models are able to recognize humor successfully.